Candidates to get through this evening, and I want to make sure that we give them each their 10 minutes. And so I'm just going to take a couple of minutes here to go over our sort of ground rules and a little bit of context. So welcome everybody to the Brooklyn Neighborhood Civic Association. This is our September meeting, and we meet every third Tuesday of every month. So if you live in the Brooklyn area and you're not already a member, please do consider joining. You can go to brooklyncivic.org and find our membership page there. Again, I'm Dan Schramm, I'm the president of the organization. Kathy Jacquard, our vice president, has helped to organize this. So I want to thank Kathy for that. We have a number of other officers here, a number of other BNCA members. I'm not going to go through them this evening because we have a number of candidates here for our forum. So this is a forum for one of the more exciting races going on this election cycle in DC for the at-large council seats on the city council. And so we have a large field of candidates in these races, and we have a good number of them who are actually able to make it here tonight. So we want to, the way we're going to do this is have each candidate, this is not going to be a debate, this is just going to be an opportunity to sort of see each of these candidates for a little bit. I'm going to ask them to give 3 to 4 minutes of time on themselves and their background, their interests, why they're running. And then we have a series of questions that we came up with through soliciting our membership for ideas on what we want to ask about. I've shared those in my emails, but we probably won't get to all those questions with every candidate, but I'm going to kind of hop around on those questions and ask at least a couple of them to each candidate for them to respond to. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into our first candidate here, who is Franklin Garcia. Franklin, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, well, thank you so much for this opportunity. And let me remind everybody that this is the beginning of Hispanic Heritage Month. So happy Latino Month to everybody. So good evening. My name is Franklin Garcia. I arrived in DC in 1981. My story is very similar to that of the immigrant that comes to America seeking a better life and works to achieve it. I attended undergraduate at GW, where I obtained a bachelor's degree in finance, and continue on to American University, where I received a master's degree in financial economics. After graduating from school, I bought my first house in DC in the 90s. I would go on to buy other houses in nearby Columbia Heights and PG County, and finally end up in Baltimore City, where I am the owner of a few multifamily buildings. For many years, I worked in banking, dealing with consumer lending. I transitioned to technology, where I currently work holding a government clearance for the last 20 years. I started my community engagement in DC when I was 14, working with the immigrant community and the Latino community. Many of you know my involvement in DC, in the DC Democratic State Committee and the DC Latino Caucus. I am currently your elected U.S. Shadow Member of Congress. In my political engagement in the city, I have worked to form partnerships with many groups. I have been there for Dreamers, for marriage equality, for calls for more national gun control, Black Lives Matter, Take a Knee, the Me Too movement. And of course, many of you have seen my advocacy for something that is very important to all of us, DC statehood. I am running because I believe I am uniquely qualified to represent the many communities that make our city. Equally important, because we need Latino representation on the city council. For nearly 50 years, our voice has been missing on the DC council, and we now have an opportunity to change that. There are many challenges ahead of us during this pandemic, and I don't think anyone can solve them all or any of them by themselves. But we can, as a city, finally bring the much needed representation we need on the DC Council. The DC Council should reflect the population of the city. I know the city well. I have been through all the 130 plus neighborhoods throughout. So I hope you all go to franklinfordc.com and join my effort to make history this November by electing the first Latino to the City Council and the first African-American woman vice president. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Garcia. So a couple questions for you. You mentioned your support for Black Lives Matter and a number of other causes. I'll ask you, what is your plan for police reform and public safety?
Yeah, well, we need to have a police force that is vested and trusted in the community. Police reform would include changing hiring practices in the force and ensure our police force reflects our community. As your council member, I would call for the creation of an internal tracking and reward system based on police de-escalation, not bonuses for incentive to write more tickets. Of course, creating more transparency and accountability for our police force and officers is key. You see, overall, we need a system that restores the trust of our police, something that is very, very much missing right now.
How should the city be managing the pandemic and at the same time protecting and revitalizing the economy?
Well, I would support the growth and development that protects and provides opportunities for DC residents. I will ensure that we expand and strengthen our rent control laws. I will do this by consulting and bringing tenants advocates to the table, as they should always be at the table and not be the last to be brought to the table. I would work to increase the housing budget, which is about 3% now, as well as the community trust fund, and focus on affordable housing and home ownership. We just need to do so much more than what we're currently doing and think ahead. You know, one of the things that we also need to remember is when we talk about inclusion in our DC Council is that because of the missing voice, our Latino community was last to get a lot of the benefits. We weren't able to get a lot of those undocumented workers any support throughout this pandemic. Only at the end we all were we able to do something about them. And that's why I think, and I will continue to say, that it is so key that we have a voice at the table.
So, you know, staying on the topic of the pandemic, what are your plans then, or what would your plans be? What would you propose for supporting businesses, small, locally owned businesses? This is a very difficult time. Certainly in Brooklyn, we have a number of small businesses who are really struggling. Do you have a plan for dealing with that part of that aspect of the pandemic?
Sure. Now we need to keep on helping our restaurants, for example, and our small business in general. I'm thinking that grants and loans are key. Now, partners like United Bank and City First are just a few examples of community lenders that I have heard have stepped up and helped many of the small businesses and provided a much rapid response that we needed. We need to get that $700 plus $1 million that the federal government blocked and cheated us. You know, that's something key that will help us to revitalize our economy. So we need to pursue that. And we need to continue employment and other benefits to families affected by the pandemic. I am committed to quickly re-strengthening our economy. And this is why I am calling for our city to prepare to start phase 3 next month, before the election, so the families can start earning much needed income to get through, and particularly as the holidays come in.
What, a slight change in topic here, but I think also still related to the pandemic. We obviously have a great public transit system in DC, but it's been severely impacted by the pandemic. Do you have a plan for ensuring the financial viability of public transit system in DC in a way that keeps it affordable for those who need to rely on it?
Well, first, I think we need to improve public transportation safety and reliability to encourage more ridership. For example, we need to do a better job of ensuring that the hours of operations serve the needs of all the residents, the workers, and our visitors. Our public transportation needs to stay competitive. The Metro Rail is expensive. It's expensive to maintain. But even as expensive as it is, I think the average person that lives in DC can afford to pay it. But we need to give subsidies to the low income earner. You know, our government should create subsidy programs for those people so that they can actually use the system better. It would be easy to provide metro subsidy to anyone making, for example, minimum wage that lives in DC. I also think we need to expand on programs like the Kids Ride Free or the senior discounts and expand it to others so that we can get everybody riding the public transit more.
You mentioned housing affordability earlier. What would you do to ensure that the future development in the city is sustainable? I think both in maybe a financial sense and in an environmental sense. And at the same time, what would you do to make sure that housing includes an adequate supply of low income and affordable housing for those who need it?
You know, that's the big thing, and there's no silver bullet response for that. I think everybody wants to add and to the ideas to this, and at the end of the day, it's a very, very challenging. As we see, you know, one of the things that we like saying in the city is that we have more population. Our population is greater than that of at least 2 states. Well, that's because we're getting about 1,000 residents a month in the city. And that comes with a lot of challenges, right? So what we need to do is we need to ensure, for one, is that we increase the money that's allocated for housing. Right now, it's about 3%. We need to do a lot more than that. Our mayor says that she is going to create a number of affordable housing units, 12,000 in the next 5 years. Well, we need to increase that and actually make it happen. But I am more concentrated really in looking at the many programs that my community, the immigrant and the Latino community, has not been using right now. You see, there are a lot of programs out there that the general population knows about, but still, it's very much unknown to my community because I think the advocacy hasn't been there. So I am going to try to concentrate in this housing crisis to ensure that oppressed and deprived communities like the immigrant community and the Latino community are at the table in the discussion as we move on and talk about affordable housing. I think that that's something that's a problem for everybody, but it's particularly difficult. If you look at home ownership for the Latino community, it's very, very low. And so we need to ensure that we change that by ensuring that some of those programs that are now in place actually go to that community. So we're at the very beginning. If you look at the hierarchy of needs, we're at the very basic of needs in terms of affordable housing in the Latino community right now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garcia. I'm going to have to stop you there. We've run our 10 minutes with you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, great. We're going to just move quickly to our next candidate. And by the way, I will say we did get Franklin going a couple minutes before the 6:05 start time, but given the number of people we have here, we are going to try to stay rigorously to a 10-minute time frame. So with other candidates, I will we may just have to just cut you off and hit mute. So don't take it personally if that happens. But I do want to move on to our next candidate here, who is Marcus Goodwin. So Marcus, are you there? And if so, please go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. Thank you all so much for having me on. My name is Marcus Goodwin. I'm a DC native from Columbia Heights. My mother immigrated to Washington, DC in 1985 from Dakar, Senegal. Today, she's a DC public school teacher. My father moved here in 1976 to attend Howard University. Now, he's an environmental scientist working on fighting climate change. I grew up primarily in the Columbia Heights community in a working class family, mostly by my mother. It had its challenges. I'm the 5th of 8 children in my family. We all started in the DC public school system. 4 of us graduated from private schools and 4 of my siblings graduated from public schools. I've spent the last 7 years of my professional career building affordable housing here in the district. promoting equitable community development, and providing vocational training after school programs for at-risk youth so that they can get good paying jobs. If elected, I'll be focused on keeping our residents safe and building a stronger, more equitable economy where every resident has the opportunities they need to succeed. Having lived in DC for the past 3 decades, I understand that many people are struggling right now, especially with the cost of living. They're also struggling because they're afraid of all of the gun violence going on in our communities. They feel the pain of inequality across the city. We've put off addressing these issues for far too long. These are the issues that I'm stepping up to address. I'm running for DC Council to put people over politics. I'll be fighting for practical solutions that address the real problems that our residents are facing. That's why I'm dedicated to focusing on housing, education, and economic development. When I talk about housing, I mean that we need more affordable home ownership. We need more people, especially our African-American residents, to own the property they're in, to create generational wealth and fix their cost of living, because the city has increasingly got more expensive over the past 20 years. When I talk about education, I know from my personal experience that I played the viola, I ran track, and I had the opportunity to paint in an art studio. These things kept me focused. And while they weren't strictly a part of my academic journey, they allowed me to express and creatively engage myself and have a productive activity to be in. We need more of our young people involved in these activities by fairly and equitably funding our schools. Finally, we need to focus on economic development in the district. That means that I want more of our young people to have the opportunity to work in careers where they can be plumbers, they can be electricians, they can ensure that they're carpenters and be a part of this changing economic landscape. I know because I have the experience doing this in the private sector that I can bring this to the council. I know that I'm someone who's coming from being a small business owner as a partner in a restaurant, that I can effectively put people over politics and help the city safely come back from COVID-19. I look forward to speaking with you all and answering your questions, because we put together a great campaign and a great community of supporters in all 8 wards. So thank you for your time. I look forward to the questions and really being responsive and being a candidate that you all can support.
Thank you. First question, what would you do to, you mentioned practical solutions and the issues of housing. So what specifically would you do to address the affordable housing issues in DC?
Yeah, well, for one, we have a percentage of units in newly built developments that is required to be set aside for affordable dwelling units. I would like to increase that percentage to 15%. Whereas currently it's 10 to 12%, we can create hundreds of more affordable units every year just by tweaking that percentage. So that's a policy I would support on the council. I would also want us to start to have a local definition for AMI. Currently, the district borrows HUD, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development's definition for AMI, but that includes Montgomery County and Loudoun County, which gives an AMI of $121,000. But here in the district, in Ward 8, the median family has an income of $35,000. So we need localized city and ward specific definitions when we're building affordable units. I also want to double down on our investment in the Housing Production Trust Fund. We currently commit $100 million a year from our budget. We need to commit at least double that amount. And we need to invest in more affordable home ownership. I want to add points to the Housing Production Trust Fund application to incentivize the development of more affordable home ownership. Because frankly, right now, most of the units we're getting are apartment units. And I want people to start to be able to build equity with their affordable units, not just rent.
What would you do in the face of the pandemic here going on in the country and continuing in the city? What should the city be doing to address the pandemic currently, and at the same time, how would you balance that with the needs of the economy?
Well, first and foremost, any decision we make should be data driven and should be based on the science. I think that temporary suspension on evictions, where it makes sense, has been a great policy and allows people to stay in their homes. Some of the additional stuff we can do is providing PPE to small businesses and our vulnerable residents who need it. I want us to get more health resources for Black residents who are disproportionately likely to contract COVID and die from COVID. We've seen that east of the Anacostia River, we've had a much higher percentage of people both contracting COVID, but also dying as a result of the virus. So I do think that the city should be continuing to look at the data, and only when it's safe and only when it's sensible, moving on to a phase 3, because we don't want to risk reinfection. We've seen many nations across the world and states across the country that have reopened too soon, and it's been to the detriment of the health of the public as well as the economy locally.
You also mentioned gun violence, which is certainly a concern that we continue to face here in Brooklyn. At the same time that I know many of us and many in the city support Black Lives Matter and support the need for reform and addressing those kinds of issues. So I wonder if you could speak to your vision for how we do those things, how we balance those things.
Yeah, I certainly know that we need to have safe communities because gun violence is nearing a decade-long high, but I certainly know that it's long past time for police reform. So big ways that I would like to reform police and focus on strengthening communities is, first and foremost, we need to start to train our police better, and we need to specifically train them to de-escalate conflict in communities. The first course of action can't be just apprehending people by any means necessary. That means that we need to ban chokeholds. We need to de-escalate conflict instead of resorting to tasers and guns. I'd like us to expand our officer-friendly program to start to create community trust and collaborate effectively with community engagement, showing our young people that police are there to work for you and keep you safe, not create an antagonistic environment. I also want to expand funding for our violence interruption programs. That way we have more people that are involved in the community at a grassroots level, stepping up to ensure that we don't have gang violence or inter-community violence exploding or ultimately resulting in unfortunate gun crime or physical violence between members of communities. And finally, police do not stop crime from happening. They show up after it's happened. We need to reinvest in our communities to ensure that these symptoms of underserved or underinvested communities don't manifest in crime. That means that we need more investments in our schools, more investments in our community centers, more investments in keeping kids in safe, nurturing, enriching environments so that they grow up in a loving space where they have all the opportunities they need to be happy and pursue their dreams.
Thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight and to answer those questions. I really appreciate it. And your time's just run up. So thank you for coming. And
thank you, Daniel. I appreciate the time of the community. When I was born, we lived at 13th and Hamlin, and we had 3 dogs. But when my second sister was born, my parents decided we had to move on and get a bigger house. So thank you all for your time. I have great, profound respect for the Brookline community, and look forward to hearing more from you. My website is Goodwin for DC, and social media, GOODWIN FORDC. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Ed Lazaire?
Yeah, Kathy?
Yeah, I don't see Ed.
Oh, well, let's wait just a minute because I actually am going to go ahead and do a little PSA here. I got a request from someone suggesting that it would be nice if they could just see the person speaking on the screen. So 2 things to that. One is you should have a setting in your Zoom that that's called active speaker. So look on your device for that option for an active speaker rather than gallery view. And it should bring up just the person who is speaking, which should be the candidates most of the time. The other thing that we might be able to do, if Kathy wants to take a look at it, there may be a way to actually turn off the cameras, or at least have it so that you can't see the cameras of other people. I'm not sure that you can do that, so probably the best thing to do is just to try and set your Zoom to active speaker mode, and that should help with that.
And everybody actually could turn off your video, and then you'd only see Dan and the speaker.
That is an option too. People could just go ahead and turn their videos off if they want to. I wouldn't, I don't think we have a way to enforce that rule, but I certainly enjoy seeing everybody's lovely faces.
And Ed is here.
Ed is here now. Okay, great. Then I'm going to, without further ado, go ahead and turn it over to Ed Lazier.
Great. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me tonight. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm Ed Lazier. I'm running for DC Council at Large. Everybody else who's on tonight. So I've been in the district my entire that has been Brooklyn. My wife and I moved in '92 when we were getting ready to start a family at 14th and Jackson, and we've lived there ever since. We've raised two sons, David, through DC public schools and Colton back in the district, and we're really happy for that. I've spent my entire career trying to give back to the district and focused on issues of equity. It first started in more personal ways, helping out at Brookland Day or being the Cub Master for Brookland PAC 98 when they needed a Cub Master. I was the president of my congregation at Temple Micah. I served on the LSAT and the PTA at my son's schools at the elementary, middle school, and high school level. And it was when David and Adam were just little boys that I decided I wanted to devote my career to making the district a better place. And I got that opportunity by leading the DC Fiscal Policy Institute for the past 20 years, and I just stepped down to run for office. And for those who don't know the Fiscal Policy Institute very well, its mission is to address the city's biggest inequities in issues like housing and jobs and education, to highlight the city's biggest challenges like unemployment or the loss of affordable housing, to dig into the city's budget, to find the money, and then work with organizations and individuals across the city to fight for change. So I've been part of bringing a $15 minimum wage to the city, paid family and medical leave, helped champion affordable housing programs like the Housing Production Trust Fund and our local rent supplement program. I have been involved in school finance and chaired a school finance commission where I made the common sense recommendation to the city to devote more resources to high poverty schools. On that recommendation, I helped the law and get it in the budget and fight to make sure the money gets to the schools where it's supposed to go. And I'm running for office to bring that advocacy energy to the council. I am frustrated, upset about the inequities in the city and how they keep getting wider, including rising in DC ranking worst in the country at displacement of Black residents. And yet we have elected officials here, but don't follow through to actually do enough about those. So I'm running to be an advocate and tackle the city's biggest challenges at the scale that they demand, in affordable housing, in jobs, things that I know will address the city's inequities and make the city a better place. And I'm really confident that I'm ready to legislate on day one as a council member. Help the pandemic. I've spent 20 years studying the city's challenges and 20 years studying the city's budget, 20 years building relationships, and 20 years counting to 7, which is a really important number in the DC Council because that's the number that you need for any legislation to pass. So any victory that I've been a part of required me to build coalitions, not just outside the council, inside the council as well. I've been counting to 7 for 20 years, and I'm ready to do that on the council next year. And that leadership has been reflected in a wide array of endorsements that I've received in the last months and weeks, including just this week from Janice Lewis-George, candidate in Ward 4, but also Brianne Nadeau in Ward 1, Attorney General Carl Racine, environmental groups like the Sierra Club, labor unions like the Hotel Restaurant Workers Union and SEIU just today, 32BJ, as well as a host of nations like Jews United for Justice. So I'm excited about the possibility of joining the council and strengthening the progressive wing. And your questions tonight and answer those.
Thank you, Ed. A first question for you would be given your background in sort of finance and budgetary issues. Obviously, the city's facing significant budget issues with the pandemic and the economic downturn that's been caused. So, what would your plan be on day one to address those issues?
I mean, I think the most important thing is that we have to continue investing in our people and the economy and not use this moment to cut funding and services that increase hardship for families and lengthen the recovery from the pandemic. So I'm eager to see the city use its reserves more than we have. We build up huge amounts of rainy day reserves and then we don't spend them. In the budget that just passed, the city used $200 million out of $1 billion in reserves. That's just not enough. I'm also eager for the city to reduce police spending, which I know is another question, and shift that into community resources. Comfortable raising taxes on our highest income residents, knowing that most DC residents agree with that as well, so that we can fund services. I'm sorry if my internet is unstable. Like I'm in my campaign office where the internet is not very good, unfortunately.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, we're noticing a little bit of that, but I think so far, at least I've been able to hear you. It might help if you turn the video off. I don't know if that might help a little bit. What would be your plan for addressing in specific terms the issues of affordable housing in the city?
Yeah, I mean, I've been an advocate for affordable housing for the entire 20 years at the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, fighting to create programs and make sure they're targeted on our lowest income residents. And I really believe that the biggest issue is just at scale. We have a lot of the tools we need, and we just need to commit to increase funding to match the need. In my last campaign when I ran, I called for the city to double its investment in affordable housing, and I believe that's needed here as well. As a council member, I would set a goal of addressing the city's affordable housing challenges over the next decade so that we can what's needed by the number of units and the cost, and then hold ourselves accountable to fully meeting that need. I want to make sure that we're building affordable housing throughout the city, so I support the mayor's effort to set targets by community as long as the targets are ambitious enough. I want to make sure that our housing programs focus on our lowest income families who are having the most challenges. And I want to make sure that we're building affordable housing where the sizes of the units actually match what families need, which unfortunately we've not been doing in the district. And certainly Brookland Manor is a perfect example where the number of units coming doesn't match the number of units currently there. The bedroom sizes don't match. It's a loss of affordable housing when it shouldn't be.
So I guess on that related issue, then how do you ensure that future development in the city is sustainable? Is the solution to the affordable housing just to keep building more units? Is that the key part of the solution, or do you have thoughts on that?
Absolutely, right? When we know that there are 30,000 households in the city who are very low income and house cost problem, and then we only build a few thousand units over a 4-year period to help them, clearly that is not sustainable. That is a recipe for continued displacement. So I do believe it is setting ambitious targets, making sure those targets are met throughout the city. And I would tie the number of affordable housing units we're building to the number of market rate permits that are being sought, so that we know that as we're building market rate housing, we are keeping up with our development of affordable housing and affordable housing.
A last question for you. What are your thoughts on the issues of police reform?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just start by saying that the police killing of Deon Kay was a shame and should have been avoidable, and was a clear sign that we're doing policing in the wrong way. The thought that an 18-year-old should lose his life in a police effort to get a few guns off the street, where a police officer just chased him down unsuspecting, got out of the car and shot him within a few seconds, is to me a clear sign of what's wrong. We have way more police per capita and spend more per capita than any other large city. So I believe we should reduce our police force. I believe we should shift services, things that police don't need to be doing, to other agencies, like dealing with mental health crises on the street or traffic incidents. I want to invest more in violence interrupters. If a mentor had talked to Deontay about his gun and helped him find a better path, he'd be alive today. So I strongly support what Black Lives Matter advocates, activists ask for, which is to defund the police and refund or reinvest in the community, things that we know keep our community stable, like affordable housing and mental health services and after school programs.
Okay, thank you, Ed, and I see that we're out of time. So I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Nice seeing you all, Brooklanders.
All right. Oops, I'm gonna start my video. Oops, start my video here. Apologies. Okay, we're gonna go right to our next candidate, who is Will Merrifield. I think Will is here. So Will, if you are here, please go ahead and you can start talking.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be here tonight. My name is Will Merrifield. For the last 8 years, I've been a housing attorney at the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless. And during that time, I've stood with and fought with people, tenant associations across the district to preserve affordable housing and prevent people from being displaced and having their communities demolished. I'm actually the attorney that represents the tenant association at Brooklyn Manor. And I just recently argued that case in front of the Court of Appeals, arguing that that redevelopment should not move forward unless all the affordable units were returned and the large bedrooms at Brooklyn Manor were not eliminated. Look, for the last 8 years, I've been on the front lines fighting against these struggles. I've seen, unfortunately, during that time that way too often our local elected leaders are working hand in glove with developers and giving them hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money and public land to build luxury units that working class people can't afford. It is causing a massive displacement in the District of Columbia of working class, mostly Black residents. It's increasing rents and it's causing this homeless crisis that we're dealing with on the back end of it. I'm running a campaign that is in opposition to our current model of housing. I'm running on a platform to build truly affordable mixed income housing through a program called social housing, which I can talk to you more about. I don't believe that continuing to throw money at developers is the way to build affordable housing. I think we have to build from the ground up. I have a plan to do that. I'm gonna be laser focused on creating and advocating for a jobs program for DC residents post-pandemic. We're obviously going to see a massive spike in unemployment. And I believe that the District of Columbia is gonna have to use its resources to put people to work and put money in people's pockets, a localized WPA New Deal jobs program, because we're going to need to have the ability to have money recycled back into the local economy so that small businesses can get on their feet and so that we can recover. And I live in Deanwood, which is a very working class community. And it's very important to the people, to my neighbors, that their children have a quality neighborhood public school to go to. I am going to be laser focused again on ensuring that no matter what zip code a child lives in, that they have access to a quality, not quality, but world-class public education. We live in one of the wealthiest regions and the wealthiest country in the world. And our local education system, our local housing crisis, and our unemployment numbers for Black men, especially east of the river, we should all be ashamed of. We can do much better as the people of the District of Columbia. And lastly, I want to highlight that we are fighting for the concept of one, I'm a believer in universal health care coverage, free health care coverage. Obviously, that's a federal issue along with a state issue. But we want to focus on expanding healthcare coverage so that people can have it and moving to a preventative model and linking affordable housing, the right to housing, the right to healthy food in your neighborhood with larger healthcare outcomes. I've seen, again, working with tenants all over the District of Columbia. I represented a bunch of tenants down at Congress Heights, and they were trying to be displaced by Sanford Capital, who a lot of people now know as the largest slumlord in Washington, D.C., who's no longer able to do business in Washington, D.C. The reason that that slumlord is no longer able to do business in Washington, D.C. is because that tenant association, I was privileged to work with them, stood up to that slumlord, fought back against that slumlord, refused to be displaced, and they won. However, in order to do that, they had to endure conditions in their units that nobody should have to endure. When, during this pandemic, when we have the stay-at-home order, it's dangerous for some people to stay at home because of the condition of their housing. And that goes for our public housing stock in Washington, D.C. So we have to fight to improve that too. But I know my 5 minutes is up. So I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to answer questions. Thanks for hearing my initial spiel.
Thank you. Will, I want to ask you about social housing. Since you mentioned that, could you talk a little bit about what specific plans would you have for addressing the housing crisis through social housing? What does that mean?
Thank you. I think I'm unique in this race is that I'm actually offering a solution to the affordable housing crisis. What social housing is, we're basing our model off a model in Vienna, Austria, where they've come very close to achieving a human right to housing. Social housing is very common in many other parts of the world. The only reason it's not common in the United States is because the influencers that developers have at both our local political level and our federal political level. So here's how it works. In a place like Austria, the municipality, so in this case, the district or a developer that can only take a 3% profit develops housing. That housing is non-means tested. Anyone can access it, paying 30% of their income in rent. The higher renters subsidize the lower renters. Because we've essentially eliminated the profit motive for the building, 100% of rents are able to be used productively. They're invested back into the building to cover the cost of the building. You invested back into the community. At the end of the month, what would have been a profit, a giant profit for the developer, turns into money left over for the building. That money is then used to pay off the construction loans for the building. So this is a model of housing that creates truly affordable, non-means tested, mixed income housing that pays for itself. It is a much more rational form of housing than the model we have right now, which is extremely wasteful. Again, it's given away hundreds of millions of dollars to build luxury units that working class people can't afford. The other thing that I want to point out about social housing is that the ground floor retail that would be associated with a social housing model would really help to spur a small business recovery. So, like tenants, small businesses are being priced out of the District of Columbia. So we could have small businesses, we could target minority-owned small businesses to be the ground floor retail at these social housing complexes. They would be paying a fraction of what they would pay on the private market as ground floor retail of these luxury buildings. And that would go a long way, that fraction of the cost would go a long way to helping to pay for the housing itself. So that is how social housing works. What it does is it puts money in people's pockets. Money that people would have been paying to the landlord stays in their pockets, and then that money is able to be recycled back into the local economy instead of people being rent poor. So it's really just a recycling mechanism to make sure that housing costs come down, people have money to spend, which helps small businesses thrive. And like I said, post-pandemic, I really believe we're going to need that. As I touched on earlier, I think that we have to have a jobs program post-pandemic, and the jobs program that I would advocate for would be to put people to work on this infrastructure project of building social housing to solve our affordable housing crisis and put people to work post-pandemic doing it. I believe that we need to get people trained up to have living wage jobs as electricians, as plumbers, and to be able to install the latest in green technologies for this new housing stock. And I believe that if we adopted this, if we embraced this, we could really come through the pandemic stronger than we were before with a more equitable housing policy, a jobs program. And again, I don't want to lose sight of, I'm a housing attorney. A lot of people say, well, he talks about housing too much. I don't want to lose sight of the need not only for housing, but investment in public education, in equitable healthcare systems. All these things go together. And, I just truly believe all these issues are so connected.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate your answer to that. We only got one question to you, but you actually addressed, I was going to ask you about the economy and jobs as well, and you just touched on those in your answer. So
thank you.
Appreciate that. So thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Take it easy.
Take care. Okay, moving right along. We are staying on schedule, so this is good news. I am going to turn next to Eric Rogers. Is Eric Rogers here?
I am. Hello.
Okay, great. Why don't you go ahead?
Hey, everyone. My name is Eric Rogers. I am a native Washingtonian. I am running, obviously, for the DC Council at Large seat. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a a little bit over 20-year DC government worker. Spent an extensive amount of time working in the city council and in the executive branch. I was the legislative assistant to Sharon Ambrose, the Ward 6 city council member, when I first started my career, and progressed on to be chief of staff for Kevin Chavis, the Ward 7 city council member. And while I was at the council, that was during the time where we were working to exit from the control board. So a lot of my government experience in the early years were on fiscal management and program development and program administration and how programs function, work favorably or unfavorably for citizens. After that, I moved over to the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs, various roles. I've done a lot of work in the Brooklyn neighborhood, a little bit before it changed, and bear with me, that sounds like a helicopter is going over my head, so if you hear that, I apologize. But at DCRA, I was the chief enforcement officer. I've developed numerous programs, process improvement programs at DCRA, certificate of occupancy process to enforcement. But when I left DCRA, I was also the city's chief licensing officer. I was deputy director for the Business of Professional Licensing Administration. Mayor Bowser appointed me her first taxi cab commissioner when she first came. And I completed my career at the Department of Small Local Business Development, where I was the chief of staff. I give all of that history, though it's a long history, to demonstrate that I do have the knowledge, experience, and willpower to manage a government. And I think that's what's important for this particular seat. The city is in economic turmoil, and we're in a situation that we have never been in before. And I think it's important for the next city council member to have the experience necessary and the understanding of district government operations, and how best to maneuver the government out of this financial crunch that we're in because of the pandemic, as well as create innovative programs to solve some of the issues that are pressing right now. A quick note, while I was working at DCRA and at DSLBD, a lot of my work was recognized by the mayor in some of her accountability reports, and some of her initial improvements to the government, as well as being recognized by President Obama. I created a website called business.dc.gov or mybusiness.dc.gov, which integrates a lot of DCRA business services. The SBA and the White House recognized that in their Startup in a Day initiative and gave the city an award of $50,000 for that work. Also, while I was at the Department of Small Local Business Development, I created the Aspire to Entrepreneurship program, which is a business development program for returning citizens, which also was recognized by the National Conference of Mayors and the National League of Cities as an innovative program to tackle some of the issues and challenges that returning citizens have in seeking employment and or otherwise, opening up a business. So I say all of that to say I'm ready, willing, and able to get the job done, and I'm ready to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. I guess the first question for you would be, what specifically, given your experience in government, I'm curious what kind of pragmatic or specific proposals would you have for getting us out of the pandemic and for revitalizing the economy at the same time?
Well, I'm not a health expert, so I'm always going to rely on the expertise of the Department of Health when it comes to how the city reopens and the metrics that we need to reopen. But outside of that, I do think that the city does need to invest a little bit more in our small businesses. They're hurting. And they account for a significant portion of our employment population here in the city. So one of the things that I definitely would do is look towards some of our reserve funds to see if we can create a local PPP program to try to keep these folks going while the pandemic is still going, as we're still waiting for a vaccine, and looking at the research and hearing the data from the CDC and Dr. Fauci. It looks like that we won't be getting a vaccine until mid next year, probably towards late next year, where we'll have it in mass. So that's one area that I definitely would invest additional city funds to keep a lot of the small businesses in all industries. Every industry has particular issues unique to their industry. So I definitely would tailor any of that support to the needs that they have in that particular industry. Second thing I would do is look towards our workforce development program. Let's be honest, unfortunately, some businesses aren't going to stay open, and they're going to go in the fold. In fact, my cousin owned a brewery, his wife owned a brewery in Montgomery County, and they just announced that they had to shut down. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting that he did with the company is hire, with the last remaining funds that they had, job training coaches to help their staff, find different employment in other industries and the like. So I definitely would do something like that, really work with the Department of Employment Services and find those skills, or those jobs that are still around that folks can fairly quickly be trained to plug into. Also, I do believe that we need to continue, and hopefully with this new budget round that's coming, or the new compromises from the federal government, that we'll get additional federal funds that we can truly insert back into our unemployment program to help folks keep going. I think in the short term, those are the two things that will help companies maintain their staff and maintain some semblance of economic stability, while also giving options to the workers. Now, as it relates to industries where we could use public space, I'm perfectly in favor of expanding our use of public space. I love the streeteries, and I would love to expand that to retail for any of our retail establishments. Create more bazaar-like, flea market-like scenarios in public space, or spaces in public space, so that those businesses can keep thriving and keep going. So those are some of the ideas that I have to help mitigate some of the business issues that are going on. I know there are a lot of folks who are talking about tax credits, tax breaks. I'll investigate, I'll research those. I don't think that they give you the economic lift that a lot of the businesses need. So, I'll look at those with a little bit of a jaundiced eye as opposed to direct funds into the companies.
With just a minute left here, a slight change in topic, or a significant change in topic. I wonder if you could speak to your thoughts on issues of over-policing, police reform, and public safety. You've worked in the DC government, it sounds like for your whole career. What are your thoughts on addressing those issues?
It's interesting to me because, I'm actually torn. Being a former government worker at the highest levels, so I have a love and an appreciation for law enforcement officers and public safety officers. But I do understand, because, I'm a victim of it too. A black guy growing up in the city, I've had guns pulled on me, for no apparent reason while driving. Cops, pull up behind me, pull me out the car. I was younger. So I have that aspect in my heart, and understand that. But at the same time, I do recognize that law enforcement is enforcing the law. And this gets to my point. We have this criminal justice model that's crime and punishment. And basically the crime is any poverty crimes, quality of life types of crimes that for the last 30 or 40 years, we have been pressing to bring down crime rates. And I do believe that it's time for us to change our criminal code. No one is talking about a significant revision of our criminal code. Law enforcement's job is to enforce the law. So if the law is changed where you don't have, it's not a criminal charge for selling gray market cigarettes. Gray market cigarettes where single cigarettes, where you break the cigarette tax, or open container, or maybe even say it, having smoking in public, smoking drugs in public and the like. Those are the types of issues that draw in the police, which then creates the situations where we have these encounters. Being from DCRA, it baffled me that I could put someone in jail for 3 days for operating a business without a business license, and taking someone's liberty for 3 days for operating without a business license, and they might not even know they have to have a business license. It just doesn't seem fair. So my focus would be on changing the law. And in changing the law, then we would in turn change the policing practices. So you won't have those types of situations where you have this constant police contact with citizens. The police can then focus on where we want them to focus on, the more violent offenders, and take them off the street. Second to that, I do believe
I'm going to have to exercise my prerogative. We're at the 10-minute mark, but I do appreciate that. Yes, we are. I do appreciate your answer to that question, and I appreciate your everything else you had to offer this evening. So I appreciate you being here.
I appreciate it, and thank you guys.
Okay, take care. All right. I'm going to move on to our next candidate here, Dr. Mike Scruggs. Hope I'm pronouncing that.
Mick.
Dr. Mick, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
Why don't you go ahead?
Well, imagine a city where all people believe that they matter. Imagine a city whose policies did not mostly benefit the wealthy or the affluent, but benefited all of us, no matter the socioeconomic status. Imagine a city government that works to provide a high quality of life. DC, a change has to come for our nation, for our city, for you and for me. I am Dr. Mick McAngelo Scruggs, and I'm seeking the privilege to become that change as your next DC councilman at large. We can't keep putting the same type of leadership in office and expect real change. We need a leader who will listen to our concerns and work to meet our needs, not evoke platforms to serve special interests. A councilman who will solicit your input in all major decisions that affect you, and through leadership, organization management, and resource management skills, work to create common sense solutions that answer your needs. COVID-19 has exposed the major cracks in our system of governing on the local level, whether it be healthcare, education, public safety, housing, caring for our elders, or caring for our homeless, and all concerns in between. And it's time to not just paint over those cracks, but to rebuild. To build hospitals and healthcare systems needed all over the city, an education system that allows our students to compete globally with their peers, a public safety system where leaders are less concerned about politics and optics and more concerned about building and maintaining the public trust while keeping us safe. Housing plans to ensure that our citizens are able to stay in their homes without the fear of abandonment by the city, the only home many citizens have ever known. Let's change DC together. Go to www.drmicdccouncil, that's DRMICDCCOUNCIL.com to read more about the change I'd like to create with you for DC. Please remember Dr. Mick for DC Council at Large as you vote on November 3rd, 2020. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I hope I didn't lose you. If you're still there.
I'm still here.
Okay, great. Excellent. So a couple questions for you.
Sure.
What specifically would you do to address the issue of affordable housing and development in the city?
Well, first of all, what I would do is make sure that people who are lower income housing, that there's more lower income housing in these developments that are sprouting up around the city. Oftentimes there's supposed to be.
I'm missing all of it. Oh.
Hello?
Oh, Kathy, can you please make sure everybody's muted? Please mute your lines. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. What I would do specifically is enforce the laws that mandate that there are a certain number of units for low-income housing or designates low-income housing, and that those units are actually being housed by people who are in low-income housing, because currently that's not happening. Many people are, or many developers and or landlords are finding loopholes out of vouchers and those sort of things. So we would put a stop to that. Also in communities, especially communities of color, communities where there is a large community of lower socioeconomic status citizens, we would ensure that the building or the development, these developers aren't bringing in condos and apartments that people just simply can't afford that live in those areas. So I would encourage development of more lower socioeconomic status dwellings that really answer the call to for our citizens who live in communities of color, but especially east of the Anacostia River.
What you mentioned that the pandemic has exposed, many issues, many social issues and economic issues.
Right.
How do you think this? What would you? What would be your plan for bringing the city out of the pandemic and revitalizing the economy?
Okay. Well, first off, I believe that the city needs to do a couple of things. One, we need to have a corporate community investment tax, and that will be placed on those businesses that grossed over or had a gross revenue of over 10 million per year. This funds in this way will be earmarked just for continuing to develop communities and invest back into the communities so that the communities will still be able to thrive. Oftentimes when developers and other companies, for-profit companies come into DC, they never invest back into the communities, and so the communities suffer. So I would encourage a 1.5% tax in that way. And then also for developers or businesses who want to come into DC, I would encourage that part of the contract would be to invest in community investment fund, but then also I would favor contracts that basically had an entrepreneurship program where they would mentor other DC-based smaller businesses, providing them with resources, such as financial resources and other resources that was basically going to allow them to be able to prosper and invest back into the community. Certainly we need a hospital east of the Anacostia River that's going to work for everyone. Because if we're healthy, then we can also be, all the other stuff will follow, but we also have to be healthy. In terms of education, I believe in an education system that will allow our students to compete globally with their peers, which means we have to totally overhaul the system and the public school system from top to bottom, which means more curriculum development or better curriculum development that allows our students to compete globally with their peers.
I'll ask you a follow-up question on that. How would you do that? How would you accomplish that specifically? Bring those kind of resources to the educational system and make it more equitable?
Oh, well, absolutely. So with the public education system, one, we would invest more in mentoring and tutoring programs for our students so that once we do develop a curriculum that will be able to serve all students, for those who will tend to not be able to meet those objectives, we need to invest in our mentoring and our tutoring programs to allow them to come up to the level of educational excellence that we will offer. In addition, we certainly have to make sure that we are providing schools the resources, the funding to be able to institute the programs that they need to institute. And that also involves teacher development, workshops and things like that. We have to develop the teachers so that they can continue to teach our students in innovative ways that are going to make them want to learn and allow us to produce the business leaders for tomorrow.
Well, I think we're just out of time, but thank you so much, Dr. Mike, for joining us.
All right.
Dr. Mike, excuse me, I'm going to get that pronounced right.
That's okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, take care. Okay, I'm going to move right along to our next candidate, and I believe her name is pronounced Mara Pickering. Mara, are you there? And could I also ask folks to please mute your lines. If you are not a speaker, please mute your line. Thank you. Go ahead, Mara.
Mr. Schramm, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me in this forum, and thank you for providing this service to your neighbors. My name is Maria, that rhymes with how are ya? Maria Pickering. I am running for DC Council because I think our city deserves a better future. I've lived here for most of my adult life since the mid-1980s. I currently live in American University Park. And my campaign motto is no more business as usual. I think it's time to bring true diversity of ideas and prudent management, including common sense solutions to the problems that we're facing as a city. I have experience in government and industry. I've been a small business owner. I know what it takes to meet payroll. I'm an immigrant and a refugee who was raised in poverty, so I appreciate the freedoms and the opportunity that our country offers. And I know from my own experience that an education is everyone's ticket to a successful future. As a mother, I believe that all DC children deserve a quality education, and I support school choice, and my goal would be to aim for a 90% high school graduation rate and to have a very strong vocational and technical education program that would allow our students who do not choose to go on to higher education to be able to graduate with a skill set that would allow them to earn a good living after graduation. As a homeowner, I support a strong and well-funded police force to keep our city safe. As a businesswoman and taxpayer, I support improving our contracting process. And as a senior, I favor reduced taxes on pension income and would support passage of the Pension Exclusion, Restoration, and Expansion Act, which would allow our seniors who are government and city retirees to shelter at least $20,000 of their income from DC taxes and make us competitive with a number of other jurisdictions and as many as 38 other states who also provide a pension exclusion relief for seniors who live in those jurisdictions. So as a former small business owner, as a contract management specialist, and former government employee, I think I'm the best qualified candidate to effect positive change for all DC residents. And I'm ready for your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, let me ask you this. What would you do? What would you specifically be doing to address the pandemic right now and get the economy going again?
Well, I think this is an area where we need to apply some common sense solutions. We have not come anywhere close to the capacity, to our hospital capacity since the start of this pandemic. Dr. Nesbitt in her briefings has said we have barely reached 75 or 80% of hospital capacity, and we're seeing a decline in cases and also a decline in deaths. And we need to try to do the right thing, that is shelter people who are vulnerable or isolate people who are vulnerable, but as safely and as quickly as possible, get everybody else back to something resembling a normal life, get children back to school, and get our businesses, especially our small businesses, back into operation, because so many of these businesses have been hard hit by the pandemic, and some of them, particularly in the restaurant industry, I know are closing. There's a restaurant over here on MacArthur Boulevard that's closing. 2 restaurants on Capitol Hill have said that they can't stay open any longer just in the past week. So we need to do everything we can to reopen our economy and put people back to work.
I just saw a request in our chat that they, if you have video capacity, it might be nice to be able to put a face with your voice, but if not, we understand.
Well, I thought I did.
Oh.
I thought I had video capacity here.
Oh, okay. I couldn't see you either, so we'll understand that you are trying to give us a video feed, but for some reason it's just not coming through. But that's okay.
Okay, well, because I see myself on my little screen. I don't know what else to do to
yeah, well, that's okay. It may be something that we
I don't know. I just clicked another button here on the screen, and I see myself on the screen. Oh, okay. Start my video. Is that
there we
better?
are. Okay, there we go.
Okay, can you see me now?
We can. Thank you.
Here I am in front of the fountain at DuPont Circle.
Great. Well, thank you. Let me just ask you another couple questions here, if we have time. Affordable housing. You know, we've had all the candidates have spoken to this. I think at this point, I'm curious to have your thoughts on, you know, the housing issues in DC, the high price of housing, the fact that it's pricing people out. What would be your policy or approach to the housing crisis?
Well, that's a very important issue, and thank you for asking that. I would, first of all, encourage a very comprehensive inventory of existing city-owned real estate assets and see how much of that could be put to good use to provide affordable housing for our citizens. I'd like to mention that I'm probably one of the few candidates who is not participating in this so-called fair elections scheme, because I see nothing fair about myself or fellow candidates taking taxpayer dollars while we still have people sleeping in the streets in the midst of a pandemic. How is that fair? I know from talking to citizens all over town, people are tired of the sweetheart deals that with developers, and a good example is the Hill East project over in Ward 6, where the developers promised that a certain number of units would be low-income units, and they have not lived up to those promises. We need to hold people to their promises. We need to really work hard to make sure that we can provide affordable housing for all of our citizens. And I think part of that is the city agencies working with existing people like a Friendship Place here in Northwest to help place people in housing and help people get back on their feet. I think there are a lot of common sense solutions we can use. I know in the Brooklyn area, people are upset about the Howard University Divinity School property, as well as the Macmillan property that is trying to be railroaded through without sufficient input from local citizens. I think the local community should be consulted, and the needs of the communities ought to be taken into account as we are looking at development and redevelopment.
Well, thank you. Thank you again. I'm trying to turn my camera on here. Thank you again for joining us this evening, Ms. Pickering. And I think we're out of time, so I'm going to move on to our next keynote. But thank you for joining us.
Thank you and good night.
Thanks. Take care. Let's see.
Yeah, Henderson. Christina Henderson.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, Christina Henderson, if you're there, if you could turn your camera on and go ahead.
There?
Hi, Daniel. Hi, Kathy.
Hello.
Hi.
And we cannot see you at the moment.
You can. Yes, you can. I can
Oh,
see
you
it.
can?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, that's on my end then.
Go ahead, Christina.
Oh, okay, great. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for organizing this. And good evening to everyone. My name is Christina Henderson. I'm one of the candidates for DC Council at Large, running as an independent. A little bit about me. I am the daughter of a retired New York City bus driver and an Army veteran. My parents always instilled in my siblings and I the value of hard work, fighting for what you believe in, and collective action. And that's what I've tried to do for my entire career. I've worked on political campaigns to help get some good people elected to public office. I've worked with a couple of school systems, including DC Public Schools. I've advised and worked with US senators, that's what I do in my day job. And for 5 years, I had the pleasure and honor of serving residents in the District of Columbia, first at DCPS, and then for 4 years at the DC Council. I was Councilmember David Grosso's first legislative director. And then when he became chair of the Committee on Education, I moved over to the committee to serve as the committee director for 2 years before leaving for my current work now. I'm running because I believe we need a more equitable DC, and because I believe we need more council members who are focused in on policies that are going to make DC more equitable and sustainable for us all. Lots of policy ideas, but 4 priorities I just want to hit on very briefly. First, increasing access to healthcare, in particular maternal healthcare in this city. The second is around childcare. For me, I view childcare as not just a care issue, but it's also a workforce issue as well. And I think we're seeing with COVID-19 that childcare is critical to making our economy work, especially here in the district. Next, affordable housing and equitable growth. And when I'm talking about equitable growth, I'm talking about ensuring that every neighborhood has access to reliable transportation, every neighborhood has access to a grocery store, every neighborhood has access to infrastructure, strong infrastructure rather, so that your streets aren't flooding every time it rains outside a couple of inches. And finally, public safety. I'd like to work as a council member to move the district from an over-reliance on law enforcement to handle some of our public safety challenges, particularly as it pertains to how young people in our city are experiencing safety issues. And I'll stop there because I want to get to some questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. What specifically would you do to manage the pandemic, or what policies would you support in addressing the pandemic, as well as revitalizing the economy?
Yeah, so I've thought about this a lot because I feel like in our conversation around COVID, we often talk about restaurants and the hospitality industry, but we often don't talk about the other types of small businesses that are in our communities and economies, like the cleaners, for instance, that I know in my neighborhood, our family run. And I know, I'm not sure about you, but I haven't gone anywhere to be able to take dry cleaning out. And so I think it's important for the district to provide help and support via either micro grants or us doing our own version of a local PPP program to help provide a support to our small businesses so that once we get to a position where there is a vaccine and we're fully open, that these businesses will be here for us once again.
What would you do? You mentioned making DC more equitable. what specifically would be your policies on the issues of housing and development?
Yeah, so I think with housing, for a long time in our city, we have allowed developers and sort of NIMBYism to drive how we do affordable housing in particular. Let's just look at the statistics. In 2018, only 1% of DC's affordable housing stock was in Ward 3, whereas over 50% of our affordable housing stock was in Ward 7 and 8. That to me is not equitable. In fact, it is sort of creating sort of modern day redlining, if you will. And so I think that as a council member, but as a council writ large, it's important for us to work with the mayor's office to be extremely intentional and targeted in terms of how we do housing incentives and how we promote growth going forward. I think that we need to make some revisions in terms of some of our policies and programs, such as, our inclusionary zoning policy in terms of, really targeting so that we are seeing affordable housing happening in all 8 wards across the city. Another thing that I really want to focus on in terms of equity around affordable housing is preservation. How do we preserve the affordable units that we already have, whether it be public housing units, our 8,000 public housing units that we have across the city, many of which are in disrepair, or our rent control laws and how do we expand and improve those, but also home ownership. Right there, I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a school leader who was saying, what do I tell a young person in terms of, I'm telling you to do well in school, go off to college, come back to the district and get a job. But I know that the way the housing prices are going, the chances are that you probably won't be able to afford a home in your own neighborhood. And so in that, I want to push for DC developing a community land trust, whereby seniors or other folks who are looking to downsize might want to sell their home to the trust to pass it on to another family so that they can experience affordable home ownership in the same manner as when they first purchased their home.
What would be your plans for police reform?
Oh man, we don't have enough time. I'm kidding. I'll just sit on a highlight.
I just read that one straight off the sheet. It's a real short one, but we could obviously elaborate on that question for minutes before giving it over to you, but I'll just let you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of things sort of building off of the work that I did when I worked at the council. So first and foremost, I think that we need to get rid of stop and frisk. I think when you look in terms of how it's impacting communities of color in the district, and particularly our young people, we have residents who spend an inordinate amount of time and attention and psychological resources just trying to be presented as a law-abiding citizen in our city. And I feel like stop and frisk is it hasn't led to a resulting continuous increase in crime. And so, that is something that we need to curb as well. I also want to look at, use of force when it comes to juveniles, not just for MPD, because they often get the brunt of the conversation, but Metro Transit Police also has a lot of uncomfortable and unhealthy interactions with our young people. And it's kind of crazy that for a city of our size, we don't have any rules and regulations in place in terms of what a police officer should do if they come into contact with a young person or a juvenile in terms of searches and things like that. And so I feel like I'll go with those two things that I feel like the council should certainly tackle. But there's a lot of other things on the criminal justice reform side where I feel like we need to do some big work in terms of repairing the harm and rebuilding the trust between communities of color, particularly Black and Brown communities in DC and law enforcement.
One last question for you, since you mentioned public transit, and I haven't thrown this question at too many of our candidates tonight, but one of our questions here was regarding the financial viability of public transit, particularly with the pandemic. What are your thoughts on ensuring viability of Metro and buses, those kinds of forms of transportation?
Yeah. Well, I think it's absolutely essential. And one of the things that I want to change is from a paradigm is that we often view the success of public transportation and ridership, and not just in terms of its essential nature for lots of workers in the district to get from point A to point B, but also essential workers to do the essential work of our city. I think Metro put out some data where they were talking about, ridership on the train is down, but, the ridership on the bus, particularly coming out of wards 5, 7, and 8, are still very strong. And the vast majority of those folks don't have any other, modes of transportation. And so I think it's a critical, like public transportation is an essential function of this city. And it is definitely essential for lots of our families who are public transit dependent in terms of doing their daily interactions and participating in the economy. Personally, for me, and I say like I'm predisposed to this. Like my dad was a bus driver for 29 years. I think we need to invest more in bus service. We've spent an inordinate amount of attention on the streetcar, which doesn't work, and the train. And I feel like as a council member, what I want to do is focus a little bit more in terms of how we build connectivity and reliability in terms of our bus service, because I feel like if it were more reliable, people would use it.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And one final question for you. What would you do to support small and local businesses?
Yes. So I think that, I think we need to have a conversation with some of our small and local businesses because their needs are different. So I often talk about childcare. Those are small business owners. Their needs look very different than a restaurant worker at this time. And a lot of though is around rents. Rents are very, very high. Our regulations in the city for childcare centers and home in particular, we require them to be on the first floor of buildings. And yet that is the most expensive real estate in our city, the first floor of buildings. So how can we as a city, one of the things that I proposed right before I left the council was looking at possibly doing a pilot whereby we provide high quality childcare centers a facility allowance in the same manner that we do for public charter schools to try to offset some of those costs for those businesses and then bring down the cost for families as well. But I think that we're going to have to, again, have conversations with small businesses in terms of what they really need in this moment and try to be as innovative and adaptive as we can in supporting the work that they do and, the revenue that they bring to the economy.
Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Y'all have a good night.
Thank you. Same to you.
Monica Palacio.
Yeah, Monica, if you're there, please go ahead.
I am here, just making sure you can see me. Hello.
Yes, we can.
Hi, so I have 2 minutes for my introduction, is that right?
Up to 4 if you want.
Oh, up to 4, fantastic. So good evening, everyone, and lovely Brookland residents. I was a neighbor for several years over in Woodridge, right off Rhode Island and Evarts. So it's great to be back in a very familiar neighborhood. My name is Monica. I'm running as an independent for the DC at-large seat. I'm running to win. I'm the first Latina to run for DC Council in this district's history. I'm an immigrant originally from Colombia, South America, where I was born, and my family moved to the United States when I was 3. I grew up in New York City, and at the age of 10, I decided I was going to be a lawyer because lawyers can fix things and help people. And I saw my family, a modest low-income family living in rent control, struggling to make ends meet. So I decided, and I saw my mother as an example. She was a pediatric nurse at a city hospital. I decided there's so much we can do to help people connect the dots to government services and to get access to the help they need. So I'm a civil rights attorney. Most recently, I served as the director of the Office of Human Rights under Mayor Gray and Mayor Bowser until January of this year. Because for many years, I had been hoping and planning to run for council, and the opportunity presented itself last fall, well before COVID hit the world. So as director of the Office of Human Rights, I was responsible for investigating claims of discrimination under the DC Human Rights Act. And that meant that over 6 years, I was responsible for thousands of cases in mediation, investigation, until final resolution to protect the rights of district residents. And each year we mediated cases that resulted in $1 million to $2 million, sometimes $3 million in settlements to DC residents for the harm or the potential harm that had been inflicted on them. So that opportunity to be the director of an agency sets me apart from all the other candidates in this race. And I want to say that loud and clear, that serving in the executive as a cabinet member meant that I was responsible for my agency's budget year after year for 6 years. and I watch the budget formulation process and the decisions being made and how painful it can be to prioritize. But I believe that government, good government, means prioritizing, making tough decisions, but earning the trust of residents, so that if one priority, one project has to wait a little bit longer so that we can do right by the folks invested in the first project, that's what we do as government, as good leaders. So, and I want to offer also that the Office of Human Rights is a very important agency, but it's a little bit like an emergency room. Unless you desperately need it, you might not know it's there and you might not know how to find it. So I encourage people to find out about OHR at the ohr.dc.gov website. So also I'm a mother. I have a family. Currently we live in Tacoma, DC, but I've lived in many different parts of the city: Petworth, Mount Pleasant, U Street, DuPont, and including Woodridge back in the early 2000s. So I'm a very proud district resident. I love our city. I've invested my entire career in public service to the city. And I started my work when I was a law student in 1992, serving incarcerated parents. It's very important that we have elected leaders that have deep roots with the families and communities in our city. And again, I'm one of the only candidates that spent 30 years in service to the district. And I think that's very important. I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
Yep.
Okay. So, so a couple of my priorities. This election is about saving lives and protecting families. I really believe it's that simple. My priorities are avoiding evictions and ensuring that people and families can stay in their homes. Because if we don't do that, we're going to have another crisis on our hands. Even the CDC is warning that evictions really should be suspended. My other priority is equitable investments in education, so that the students and schools that need us the most are getting the resources they deserve to succeed. And last but not least, we can talk about racial justice and racial equity. I believe in the principles of the Black Lives Matter movement. As a Latina, I have worked diligently to establish solidarity between immigrant communities, the Latino community, and the African American community. And there's more to be done there, but we have to stand together to make sure that we don't get pitted against each other. And yes, it's time that we set very ambitious goals around fighting racism with metrics, so that MPD has a plan in place to change, because we can't just flip a switch and end police brutality overnight. It's a culture, it's a deeply embedded culture. But we can immediately change rules and regulations for greater accountability. And as your councilwoman, that's what I would do. Thank you very much. I'm ready for some questions.
Thank you. First question for you. You may have spoken to this, I may have missed it, but could you speak a little bit more about what your policy and plan would be for addressing the housing crisis in DC?
Right. Well, no, I did not speak too much about it. I said that in the short term, we have to help people pay their rent so that we avoid a flood of evictions, which will only feed into both food insecurity, exposure to, COVID, and put children's lives, in limbo. So we need to pay rent to avoid evictions. We need stronger rent control laws in the district. I think we need to invest in our affordable housing stock and our subsidized housing units, so that we can invest in protecting them in terms of what we have. But I think we need a long-term plan that's more ambitious in terms of building more affordable housing. I bring experience in enforcement, and I want to make sure that folks understand that even though I was part of the government, I was an enforcement agency. So I have the advantage of having X-ray vision into the policies and practices of agencies like DHCD, like DHS, or the Department of Employment Services, 3 critical agencies in our recovery process.
Could you say more about that in terms of what you've seen in those agencies through your prior work, and how that informs what you would do going forward?
Well, yes. And again, I'm not going to call out particular people in leadership, but I do think that there is a sense that there's a lack of a sense of urgency sometimes in serving families. And I've heard people say, well, that just happened once, right? Well, that one family didn't get the X, Y, or Z they were supposed to get, but we have so many. And my policy was always that every family counts, every customer counts, every resident counts, and they must get equitable access to service, because if they don't, then you're effectively denying that service, whether it's the DMV, which I had many tussles with, or DHCD in thinking about how to reach potential homeowners that didn't speak English. I mean, there were a myriad of programs. I worked with over 70 agencies in making sure that they were in compliance with the Language Access Act, with the ADA, and also thinking about the subcontractors throughout the city. So my work was quite extensive.
I think we may actually be out of time. So I was going to ask one more question, but I'm going to have to hold it. So thank you for taking.
Oh, it went so quickly.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
Thank you. I will put my information in the chat, and stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Take care. Our next candidate is, I believe the name is pronounced Jeannie Lewis, but she can please, if I have that. Janae, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Kathy was trying to get me the right pronunciation quickly, but
no problem.
Well, welcome, Janae.
Thank you. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So good evening, everyone. My name is Janae Lewis, and I'm running as an independent for the DC City Council at large. I haven't had the pleasure of living in Brooklands, but I spent quite a bit of time there. And actually, before I moved back to DC in 2010, stayed briefly with a friend who owns a home there. So beautiful neighborhood, and happy to be speaking with all of you this evening. I live in Ward 7 in Fort Davis, and I'm originally from the DC area. I grew up in Prince George's County and spent a lot of time in the city because my mom was a public schools teacher and my dad worked for Amtrak, and I went to high school in DC at Georgetown Visitation up in Northwest. So growing up here, I remember DC in the 80s and 90s, and it formed who I am. And I remember it being a place of home of many people from different places who cared about this specific place and also invested in me and making sure that I had a good start to life. So I went away to college and lived all over the country, doing primarily social justice work in nonprofit organizations with a huge focus on racial equity. I was a community organizer working with interfaith groups on shared social concerns. I worked with youth on restorative justice programs and diversionary programs in North Carolina. And when I came back to DC in 2010, I worked for an international organization, but directed US programs, excuse me. And our big program was called Congressional Conversations on Race. And so I worked with members of the US Congress in a bipartisan fashion to talk about how race intersects with policy. And so being home in DC in 2010 and seeing that there was quite a bit of inequity in our city while I was doing this work across the country concerned me. And I've spent my time here in DC volunteering in different capacities, working to volunteer with different groups on housing issues and other racial equity issues in the city, doing interfaith work. But I plan to bring my national nonprofit experience and the experience I have seeing best practices all over the country to the city council. So our campaign talked to voters in all 8 wards before we launched. And we talked to folks about vision. At that time, we had a surplus and we asked folks about their vision for our home in DC. And unfortunately, COVID has put us in a deficit and has put us in a different place. But much of what folks said still stands, and that's what our platform is. So we're focusing on equitable development across the city, and I'm happy to talk about that more in your small business question. Excellent schools in every part of the city, and of course, sustainable housing, which is a critical issue, and I know you have a question about that. And in light of COVID, we also have some thoughts around healthcare and around real community safety that goes beyond policing. So I'll pause there, and I look forward to your questions this evening.
Thank you. Well, the first question I'll give to you is, given your background and in particularly work in racial justice issues and restorative justice, is if you could speak to your thoughts on the current issues and questions around racial justice, over policing, and what you think DC should be doing in regards to police reform, if anything.
So I think that the recent call to decrease the police budget and reinvest that money in other services is the right call. Our police budget is overinflated when you look at the dearth of money for mental health services, violence interruption programs across the city. So I think that the commission that the council recently convened in this last budget cycle is a good start. But if we're really going to reimagine community safety, we need a leader on the council who has experience in convening the community broadly to collectively reimagine what that looks like. And I have that experience. I will attend 3 or 4 conversations in any given week with different folks who are all talking about reimagining our community safety, but they're not talking with one another. And so we need a leader who can bring the city together broadly to reimagine that and then invest the resources to make that happen.
Could you speak to, you also obviously discussed your background in equity issues, and so curious what specifically you would think of as the right policies for affordable housing and ensuring that everybody has a place to live in an appropriate way.
So in this short term, in this crisis moment, we have to cancel rent. And I know that that sounds scary to a lot of landlords, but what I've been proposing is that we delay the payment of rent and we cancel rent for those who have been economically impacted by COVID. And for the emergency rental assistance program, which we know supplements rent for those who can't pay, we need to add a consideration for small landlords so that those small landlords who live in the district and rely on that rent for their income are not negatively impacted. For larger landlords, you know, the goal is to get to the end of the year where many of those costs can be recovered through tax refunds and through other means. So that's an initial step. But long term, I think that we need to invest more deeply in cooperative housing. DC has a strong TOPA law for multi-family units who want to convert their housing to cooperative housing. I think that that is a long-term path to wealth in the city. And I also think that we need to be more diligent about true mixed income housing. Reservation 13, for example, in Ward 6 and Ward 7, it spans 2 wards. There's a new development coming there. And so it is highly possible to have housing that is at all income levels on that one development, and we need to do that. And we also need to ensure that some of our most affordable housing is reserved for seniors. Oh, and one last thing, we need to make sure we fix the loopholes in rent control, especially voluntary agreements. That would preserve some of the affordable stock that we already have and make sure it goes to the right folks.
I'm going to go just slightly off script because your work with the congressional conversations on race sounds very interesting. And I wonder if you might share a few thoughts about that experience.
Sure, my pleasure. So what we did was work with individual members of Congress who convened bipartisan, multiracial conversations in their districts. And we designed an experiential activity for leaders in congressional districts to talk about the legacy and history of racism and how it impacted local policy. We did this in Oakland, California, New Orleans, Louisiana, St. Louis, Missouri, and Rocky Mount, North Carolina, which is Eastern North Carolina. We also convened bipartisan dialogues in DC with sitting members of Congress and with executive appointees to talk about that. And generally speaking, what was most powerful is that diverse groups of people who'd known each other a long time, leaders in a congressional district, were in a room relearning the history of their districts, relearning the Black history, the Latinx history, the Asian American history, the Native American history. And with that new learning and understanding of shared experiences across racial lines, they were able to understand the current challenges they were trying to solve differently and work together. I would say our biggest success is in Eastern North Carolina, where the congressman's office and some other folks were able to leverage dollars for Black farmers who had been left out of previous federal programs.
Very cool. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Well, I think we are just at the end of our time here with you, so I really appreciate you joining us.
We have 1 or 2 more minutes, Dan.
Oh, we do? Oh, okay. Well.
Yeah, I talk pretty fast.
Yeah, well, you got as much content out as the rest. No. Let me ask you one more question then.
Sure.
And again, you may have spoken to this a little bit already, but what specifically would you do to help small businesses, particularly with the pandemic in DC? What's the right policies for that?
I'm so glad you asked. So firstly, we need to make sure that small businesses have access to PPE, protective equipment for their employees. And many were left out of the federal stimulus package as well. So we need to supplement those who did not get the Paycheck Protection Program. And so in the short term, I think we need to invest our capital in doing that. We need to relieve rent for brick and mortar small businesses in the same way that we've relieved rent for individuals, or at the very least defer rent and defer taxes for those small brick and mortar businesses. But long term, I'm proposing a mini bonds program in which residents like me, whose income and is pretty steady because I can work from home during the pandemic, can buy bonds that generate immediate capital for the city. And that capital can be invested in a very targeted project. And that targeted project is providing money to help our small businesses stay afloat until our local economy recovers.
That the concept of buying bonds is something I don't think I've heard of before. So that's a really interesting. Is that something that any other jurisdictions have done?
Yes, so they've done it in Denver, and I believe they did it more focused on housing in order to either repair housing or build new housing. But Denver, Colorado has done this program before. Yes, so you can Google it.
Very interesting.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Janae. And
My pleasure.
we're now at the end of your time, so thank you for joining. Mm-hmm.
And I'll stay on a bit in the chat if folks have other questions. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you. All right, our next candidate is Calvin Gurley. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but Calvin, if you're on, please go ahead.
I don't see Calvin.
Oh. Then we can come back to
Vincent Orange. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's see if we have Mr. Orange here.
I believe I saw him earlier. Okay.
And we've got a few more that we can try for.
Kathy Henderson.
If we have, do we have Kathy Henderson? Or Marcus Bachelor or Ann Wilcox? Or any other candidates here?
I see Vincent Orange is here, but he's
let me just check. Let's see, we got 42. Well, I would hate to cut it short because I know that
Calvin Gurley. No, he just came on. No.
Yeah, I'd hate to cut it short because I know that I think a few of these last candidates were planning to join us, but their time slots are in a few minutes, so they may not have joined just yet. Let me, if folks can bear with for just a moment, Kathy, maybe what we could do is shoot an email to these folks and see if anybody can join us. So we'll go ahead and go on mute here for just a second and stand by.
Thank you. Mr. Lazier, your answer to that question. Should DC exchange its rent control law?
Oh.
I see that Ann Wilcox is here.
Great.
Ann?
Yeah.
Thank you. I hope I'm not calling too late. Okay.
No, right on time.
No, you're not actually, because we had a couple folks who aren't on yet, and so we're fishing around for candidates who might be available.
Okay.
So
Okay.
since you're here, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right. Okay. So we get a 2 minutes intro. Okay. Well,
Yeah, 2 to 4 minutes if you want.
Okay. Okay,
Yep.
great. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for having me. It's good to speak to the Brookland neighbors. You know, one of the beauties of this Zoom campaign season that we're in is that we've gotten to speak to many different communities around the city. So good to see everyone in Ward 5 tonight. My name's Ann Wilcox. I am a lawyer who's lived in DC since the early 80s. When I came to DC through the sort of college intern circuit, I really liked the city, and I went to law school at American University and have sort of put down roots ever since. At that time, I joined the Statehood Party at the time. Hilda Mason was our council member, and we've had other members of the Statehood Party join ANCs or serve on the school board. And I was actually one of those. I was a school board member for Ward 2 from 94 to 98. That was during Mayor Berry's last term. So I had that experience in education policy. And also in the early 90s, I was appointed to the Commission for Women by Mayor Sharon Pratt Kelly. So we worked quite a bit on women's and family issues, also the issue of kinship care, which was the idea that grandparents who have sort of informal custody of grandchildren, you know, oftentimes due to the drug epidemic and so forth, that they would have the legal authority to get children enrolled in school or get health care and so forth. So that was a really emerging issue at that time. So I was on the school board. My legal work has always been through sort of progressive circles. I've done landlord-tenant, worked with a group called the National Lawyers Guild, which is a progressive legal organization. Sometimes we support those protesters that you see around town. And also more recently, I'm doing some committee work with the DC Bar on DC policies. So it's kind of fun to work in these different professional communities. The Statehood Green Party stands for a range of progressive issues. So we're obviously statehood is our first and foremost, our central issue. We've supported full statehood, you know, not just voting rights or half measures. So that's kind of been our calling card. But we also support affordable housing in every community around the city, and also enforcing the affordable housing laws so that developers don't get out of the requirements to put deeply affordable housing or inclusionary zoning or any of those things, that they need to be held to those requirements. We also support health equity. We opposed closing DC General way back when it closed as a hospital, but we definitely support developing new hospital facilities, such as the new hospital that's proposed in Ward 8 now. We need to move forward with that. And also community health centers around the city, particularly in this age of COVID. We also strongly support public education. I was on the school board when it was the last fully publicly elected school board in the 90s. And ever since then, it's either been a hybrid or what it is now, which has really no real authority other than to be advisory. And we think that the schools need more direct accountability to the community, to parents, to teachers who can have their voice. And the full mayoral control that we're under is not a good model over the long term. You know, sometimes that's done in the short term for communities to sort of get on their feet, but over the long term, you need much more community involvement and accountability for schools. So we definitely support strong public education. You know, I know we'll get into different areas, but obviously we're under a lot of financial stress right now with the COVID. So we support, obviously we need to dig our way out of this financial hole, but we want to continue to support healthcare, education, and public and human services as much as possible while we're negotiating, you know, the economy over the next 6 months or so. So I think that's kind of my, right now I live up in Ward 4, Shepherd Park area, not too far from, you know, the Eastern Avenue and the Silver Spring area, but other earlier times in DC, I've lived in Columbia Heights area and also in Southwest for a while. And I really did like the Southwest neighborhood as well. Never lived in Brookland, but I've always enjoyed visiting there from time to time. So thanks very much. I'll go on to questions, I guess.
Sure. Thank you. What I guess you hit on a lot of issues there that you and the State of Green Party have focused on over the years. What would be your top priority in the short term if you were on the council?
Right. I think the housing is still the most critical area facing the district right now, and maintaining and improving affordable housing. You know, we're losing so much housing out of the affordable stock, either because, you know, landlords allow it to deteriorate and then they come in with a, you know, a petition to raise rent so they can rehabilitate the housing. And those kinds of things we're losing housing stock. So I think we need to preserve housing as it exists, also have more home ownership options. For example, tenants being able to purchase their building through the TOPA program or co-ops and other methods, and also building new affordable housing. I live near Walter Reed right now, and there's going to be some affordable housing buildings and townhouses going up in Walter Reed. So we need more of that. But you know, they ask you this question, which committee would you want to be on? I think the housing committee is still the key committee. So.
What would you? Thank you. What would you do then with respect to the pandemic and the associated economic crisis?
Yeah, right. It is going to be tough, and the council made some tough decisions this summer. You know, not paying DC government employees their full step increases was an unpopular decision, and it did help, I suppose. But we would also support doing some tax adjustments. We supported Charles Allen's proposal to raise the tax rates on the people making $250,000 or more. We thought those people could afford it. You know, they're not really going to leave DC like everyone says. You know, that's a tax credit or tax increase that those people can handle. Also, we think we should reverse the Trump tax cuts that were made back in a couple of years ago. They passed some local tax cuts to mirror the federal, and those could be repealed. So, you know, it's going to be, we're going to have to spread resources around. We do think we should maintain human services and education and health in those key areas, but some tax adjustments would help as well.
Great. Okay, thank you. And I think the slot that you were in,
am I running over?
Has now come to an end.
That's okay, but that's okay. I think we should allow Anne 3 more minutes.
Oh, okay.
I'll try to give you short answers. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. No, okay, that's great to know. Okay, so one last question, Ms. Wilcox. What would you do to support small locally owned businesses during this time?
Right. You know, it's a really tough time. You know, we heard today that a bunch of restaurants on 14th Street are going to have to close, and I'm sure Brookland has lost a lot of small companies. And they did the PPP loans for a while, but I know that's, you know, pretty much gone at this point. So to the extent that the DC can, you know, get any more money from the local budget or access federal funds, we need to try to make those loans available to those folks, and also try to help the workers get unemployment, you know, over the short term, so that hopefully 6 months or a year from now, there will be jobs to go back to. And we also need to keep the transportation system going, you know, make sure that Metro is funded so that a year from now, there will be a healthy rail and bus system for everyone to use. So it's a tough balancing act, but I think we can manage, hopefully, over the next few months. But those are all great questions. And you know, I feel lucky because I've been able to work at home, and, you know, I didn't have to encounter that income interruption, but I know it's been really hard for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So,
great.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us. I appreciate you taking the time. Very interesting, and good luck to you. And I think we'll move on to our next candidate now.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Take care.
Vincent Orange is here.
Great. So why don't we turn it over to Vincent Orange. If you can go ahead and start your camera and take 3 to 4 minutes to share a little information about yourself and why you're running, and then we'll have a few questions for you.
Sure. Well, good evening, Brooklyn. As you know, my name is Vincent Orange, Ward 5 resident in excess of 30 years. I'm an attorney, a certified public accountant with degrees in taxation, law, business administration, and communications. I've had the opportunity to serve in both the private and public sectors as president of the DC Chamber of Commerce, as the Ward 5 council member from 1999 to 2007, as an at-large council member from 2011 to 2016. I served as a DC Democratic National Committee man during the Obama administration. I've served as the PEPCO Region Vice President and the Chief Financial Officer of the National Children's Center Incorporated, and I started my career as a tax accountant at Arthur Anderson and Company. As many of you know, if you were around in the 1999, early 2000, it was a very critical time for the city. We had a $518 million deficit. We had junk bond status. We couldn't pay our bills, and the control board came. Congress gave us a prescription. That prescription was to balance your budget for 4 consecutive cycles, and the control board would go away. We had the opportunity to do that, and we also were in a favorable position because the country was going through a recession. However, everyone in the DMV still had jobs because of the seat of government, federal government was here. And we created a plan called the Economic Resurgence of Washington, D.C., Citizens Plan for Prosperity, 40 action items, and we execute those action items well. Make a long story short, we went from that $518 million deficit to $1.6 billion in our rainy day fund. We went from junk bond status to AAA bond status, to a control board, to no control board, and to a lot of prosperity here in the city. For me, it was a good time in Ward 5 because we were ahead of the curve in so many areas. In the areas of economic development, in the areas of recreation centers, and in the arena of education. Thank goodness for me, Pat McGuire, who's the president of Trinity University, opened her doors for me, and we held summits there, and we entertained every economic project that was going on in the city because no one was really interested. Mayor Williams would come and we'd plan things out. We jumpstarted economic development by getting rid of that 25-acre car impoundment lot, the Salt Dome, and from there, we're able to get McKinley Tech reopened as McKinley Technology High School. From there, we were able to get North Michigan Park, Turkey Thicket, and Brentwood recreation centers up and running. And each one of those projects jump-started the renaissance in the District of Columbia. But today, I'm running to rejoin the DC Council to provide mature, experienced leadership, institutional knowledge, and sound judgment to plan and execute the successful comeback of the District of Columbia. Today, the district is broke. We're on the verge of a financial collapse. Pre-COVID-19, we had $1.8 billion in our rainy day fund. We're now down to $149 million. We had a unemployment compensation fund of $600 million, but because our unemployment continues to escalate and we're approaching 15% unemployment, our unemployment compensation fund is under $200 million. The problem with our financial situation is that if we have to borrow from the US Treasury, the control board comes back. And can you imagine having a control board in the District of Columbia under the jurisdiction of the Trump administration? So we need to come together. We need to work hard and make sure that we come back better. And we all have to come together the way we did in the late 1990s, early 2000s, and make sure that we rebuild our house. And COVID-19 does not discriminate. It has hit everyone practically the same. There's been disproportionate impact east of the river. We've had to redefine who we call first responders. We found out that our first responders could be the cashiers in the stores, the technicians and the janitors in the hospitals, our metro bus drivers. And so it's been redefined, and we have to find a way to come out of it. Let me end just by saying that I thought that the DC Council should have come off of recess and never should have went on recess. And we should have solved one problem right away, and that was engaging education and making sure that our children were ready for distance learning by providing each child a laptop, access to the internet, training, and PPE. The ideal that the schools are going to open by November 6th, that's a worthy goal, but I don't think that is going to occur, especially if the second wave hits. So therefore, if we had put an infusion of dollars in the educational system and at least taking care of our children who have not been really having the educational opportunities since March, at least that would have been a problem that we could have addressed right away. Right now, 22,000 students, they're still looking for them. Generally, we have about 90,000 students in both charter schools and our public schools. And now we have to go out and try to find those 22,000. So we have some issues that we have to address, but it's going to take all of us working together. A lot of us are going to have to put our own personal agendas to the side and make sure that we can bring the District of Columbia back better and stronger. So thank you very much to the Brooklyn Neighborhood Civic Association for providing me this opportunity to be here this evening.
Thank you, and thank you for your introduction and your opening remarks. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to, as you noted, the budget crisis, the economic crisis that we're facing. Where do the resources come from to get us back on track? We always talk about the programs that we all want to see, what we'd like to see funded. Where does the revenue come from?
Well, the revenue comes from the business community. We've been enjoying the business community generating in excess of $8 billion. And that generation puts about $2.5 billion in our treasury. We get our revenue from income taxes, but with unemployment as high as it is in the district, we're not getting all those individual income taxes. We get a large chunk from sales taxes. So we have 1 million people that come into the city every day, but those folks are not coming into the city. They're not spending their dollars, so we're not collecting the sales taxes. And then the property taxes, we really will get the brunt of that impact in 2021, 2022. So with all that being said, the question is, how do we address this? One thing that this really crystallizes the problem that I've been talking about for quite some time is that the city must learn how to circulate its dollars in the boundaries of the District of Columbia. We must stop doing business with states and businesses that are outside the District of Columbia that are not subject to DC taxation, that do not hire DC residents. Right now, we have an expendable budget of $2 billion, but I can guarantee you that a lot of those dollars are being shipped out of the city. This council passed a universal paid leave bill that pays $160 million to provide paid leave benefits to 322,000 non-residents. A $250 million tax on our business community in DC only gets a benefit of $90 million. And those folks that come into the city, they get sick, they can get 8 weeks of paid leave to bond with a newborn child, 6 weeks to take care of a family member, and 2 weeks to take care of their own personal situation. Yet 94,000 DC residents, taxpaying residents, are excluded from those benefits simply because they work outside the city. But they may work outside the city, but their paychecks are subject to DC taxation. They come home every night. And we should have followed the bill that Councilmember Mary Che had put in place. And that way we would have been taxing residents and non-residents alike, and we wouldn't have taken up this $250 million. This council prior to pre-COVID-19 was talking about giving $154 million to purchase Metro cards for everyone. Yet, you don't want to provide $10 million to have an effective returning citizens program to make sure that the returning citizens can assimilate back into the economy. You don't want to spend $24 million to provide free tuition at the University of District of Columbia. Those dollars would help the university as well as we continue to educate our young people. Today, we know that you really need at least an associate's degree, and you could get that at the University of District of Columbia. A while back, I was talking about building 1,600 square feet units, and folks laughed at that. But now today, everyone wants them, and it was an affordable program. The program was to, in fact, these units would be for seniors, first-time home buyers, and those at minimum wage, because we need to keep our workforce in the city. And you may know that I was the one that got the minimum wage passed at $15 per hour. I was the one that got the legislation passed to provide 5 days of sick leave paid to our tip wage workers, as well as the wage theft legislation. So my main point is we got to get back to focusing on the District of Columbia. Overall, we're a $16 billion organization. We get $8.5 billion from the business community, and the other $8 billion comes primarily from the federal government. And with that type of money for 700,000 residents, we should be doing a lot better if we learn how to trap our dollars at our borders and circulate the dollars throughout all of these communities. Then we can address education, the digital divide, racial injustice, and that nature.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Orange. And I see our time is up with you, but I really appreciate you taking the time.
All right.
And for your very interesting, informed perspective and answers. So thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to say that my website is vincentorange2020.com. Please check it out. It has the Vision 2020. But at the end of the day, we all got to make sure that we don't collapse.
All right. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.
Yep.
Kathy
Kathy.
Henderson?
Yeah. Do we have Kathy Henderson? Okay,
Yes,
great.
yes, she's on.
Kathy, if you're there, why don't you go ahead?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yep. And we can see.
Right. Good evening, Brookland. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I just left another forum, and I'm really happy that you're still having a discussion that I can join. I want to thank the host, Daniel Schramm, Ms. Jacquard. I see my good friend, Carolyn Petty. And thank you so much for me to be able to share with you my record and why I'm running. I'm a 20-year effective advisory neighborhood commissioner. I'm an award-winning advisory neighborhood commissioner. In this election, and well, any election, you know, people can tell you, oh, I want you to elect me because X, Y, Z. But typically they don't come to you with a record of what they've done and how well they've done it. Well, we know with regard to my record that I've performed capably on behalf of the citizens that I've had the honor of representing. I've won awards from People magazine. Well, not awards, but recognition. I was featured in People magazine, Essence magazine. I've won awards from the Chief of Police, the U.S. Attorney's Office, CSOSA, ANC 5B, and a number of other organizations for the quality of the work that I've done. I have a record of making government work for all. As you know, advisory neighborhood commissioners don't earn 1 cent. But I was able to put my community on the map and fight for us like it mattered. And I was able to deliver tangible benefits for citizens like street lights, speed humps, and development, economic development that we actually want. I'm not in anyone's back pocket, and I certainly do not support backroom deals or taxpayer giveaways for clandestine projects that only a few support. I have a record that supports citizens' interests. I'm proud of that record, and the people that continue to vote for me, they are proud of that record. And one of the reasons why I really honor the position of advisory neighborhood commissioner, it's one of the first elected positions in the district's home rule charter, because advisory neighborhood commissioners are the closest elected representatives to the citizens. And over the 20 years, that has afforded me the opportunity of actually talking to my neighbors, ascertaining what they want. I've actually facilitated meetings. We work with the police. We work with every district agency. I've had most of the district agencies at my meetings because my goal was to bring government closer to the people. You cannot get your wishes actualized unless you're at the table. And I can tell you, I've made sure over the years that my residents are at the table, making decisions, moving forward. And I will take that same drive, that same determination, and that same excellent record to the council if given an opportunity to serve everyone. I know how to make government work for everyone. When I worked for the district government, I worked at the Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services. And I don't know if you remember, but that agency was under a court-ordered consent decree for things they weren't doing. And one of the things I was tasked with was implementing a dental suite and actually facilitating getting the dentist hired. And I can tell you, I was able to cut through red tape, because I don't accept that we can't get it done and we can't get it done quickly. And when I left that agency, the dental suite was fully operational, and I'm happy for that. I worked at the Department of Employment Services, where I had the highest caseload for helping displaced workers re-enter employment. And I can tell you, I was able to get 97% of the people on my caseload back into employment. To this day, neighbors still stop me in the Safeway, in the Giant, at the gas station, and they say thank you. They say thank you for the help that I was happy to confer, because I really honor the opportunity to be a public servant, and I've excelled at it, and I want to do more. And I certainly want to lend my voice to the council to get us back on the right track. I'm a preservationist. I do not accept that we can't have affordable housing, but we have to build too tall buildings that obscure our iconic skyline. That's just not true. And I want to be able to do the work for the people. I was in AmeriCorps Vista when I went into 16 of the district's neediest schools to help first through third graders read, help to improve their reading skills. I was successful in that. After my year of service, which I used to pay off my student loan, but after my year of service, my work was exceptional, and they hired me as a project site coordinator. You know, I'm an overachiever in terms of, I want to make a difference. I have made a difference. I lost my mother this past April to the COVID virus, but I want to continue the work that she instilled in me and how she raised me, the values she gave me. She said that we can make a difference. You can make a difference. I believe that. And I put my record, my strong 20-year record, up for your consideration. And I ask for one of your votes on the council on November 3rd. Let me work for you. Let me do what I know can be done. Government can work. It can work for citizens. I've been doing this a long time. I'm not in anyone's back pocket. You can trust me. I'm certainly not doing this for the money. And I really appreciate the opportunity to make a difference. And my community is far more improved since I have become and served as the ANC commissioner and gotten involved in our city government. And I thank you for the opportunity to share just a small amount of what I've done with you this evening. And I certainly welcome your questions.
Great. Thank you very much for that introduction. And I guess as an initial question, what specifically, what would be your policy or your primary policy priorities if you were to join the council?
Well, certainly I have a record of public safety. You know, we're all looking at what's going on in the country, and it's really disheartening. But I can tell you, in my community, we have a different relationship with the police that is very positive. It's very loving. We work with them. We walk with them. We talk to them. They are our neighbors. We have a partnership that works. And I certainly want to see that replicated throughout the city. And I'll work towards that. Because if you're talking about lack of economic development, if you're talking about food deserts, if you're talking about the need for affordable housing, the first thing that we have to address, and we have to get it right, is public safety. When the community is safe, businesses want to locate in the community. It's not a tough sell to ask people to come to your community when it's safe. And that's why it's been a priority for me. The schools, one of the priorities is making sure that our children and adults can actually read and improve our literacy. When our children and adults can read, everybody benefits. We have to uplift our entire city. And I look forward to casting a very wide umbrella and welcoming as many and all of our district residents under that umbrella so that we can uplift everyone, uplift our quality of life, and move forward. And we don't have to do that by prioritizing crazy development schemes that simply drain our taxpayer dollars.
So on education, what specifically what would your plan or policy be to improve educational opportunities in the district?
Well, one of the first things I would do after being sworn in is to put together a schedule to actually visit every school in the District of Columbia. We need to make sure that our schools are in good repair, that the climate is open for education, and the schools will be reopened soon, and we will be able to move forward post-COVID. And I want to make sure that our students and our teachers are well supported in their efforts for education. And I want to and I also think that I want to have conversations with the Washington Teachers Union to really prioritize phonics, which is research-based and improves literacy. And we need to move forward with that. I remember every teacher I've had since first grade, because teachers are our primary, next to our parents, they really enrich our lives in meaningful ways. And we need to find ways to continue to strengthen our relationship with our teachers. And
sorry, are you there? Hello? Kathy? Ms. Henderson?
Looks like we may have lost her.
Yeah, it looks like she may have lost a connection or something. Kathy, did Marcus Baxter join?
I don't think so. I haven't, he was gonna try to join, but I don't see him, so.
Okay, well, we gave him an 8:20 deadline to get on. So, and we are at 8:20, and it looks like we have lost Kathy Henderson. So I appreciate everybody who stayed with us this far into the evening. I hope this has been informative for you. It's been incredibly informative for me, not just to get to know who the candidates are, but to get a sense of just a wide range of issues, viewpoints, and policy proposals for how to improve DC. So this has been very interesting for me. I think, given that we only had a couple of folks left and they don't seem to have been able to join us, this is probably a good point to go ahead and wrap up the meeting. We have 32 participants still with us. We usually during our BNCA meetings, we do take a moment to do a quick round of announcements at the end. I did have one thing I was going to mention tonight, just because I could and because it's coming up. Our neighbors over in Edgewood are led by Nick Chiolis, the ANC commissioner, are having a cleanup day on Saturday. And I talked to Nick about that, and he said folks in Brooklyn would be welcome to join in that. So they're doing a street litter pickup day on Saturday. I believe it starts at 10 a.m. and we'll go for a couple hours. And if you want to participate in that, I'm planning to participate. I'm going to go over to the Annie's Ace Hardware over on A Street, right across the tracks off of Monroe Street. And they'll be set up there to hand out trash bags and gloves. So if you want to join your neighbors in Edgewood and Brooklyn on Saturday morning and do a little community cleanup, I want to encourage people to do that. Like I said, I'm going to do that myself, and we can always do a little bit to clean up some of the litter that tends to show up on our streets. So I hope you take a chance to do that. We didn't have a treasurer's report this month, and we didn't meet in August, so it's been a while since we got a treasurer's report update. Terrence is going to do that for us next month. I can say, if you haven't already, I encourage you to donate to our fundraising campaign for the Brooklyn Union Baptist Church food pantry. They could really use our support, and we are continuing to work with them on that. And Renee, who is also known as Gabriella, is noting that there is a voter registration drive on Saturday. I'm just trying to open the chat box here. Thank you, Renee. So if anybody still needs to register to vote, please note, you can register to vote on Friday with the DC Board of Elections at the Brooklyn Union Baptist Church, starting at 10 a.m. Brooklyn Union Baptist Church is at 1301 14th Street Northeast. So again, if you need to get registered to vote, there's a place to do that. I see Kathy here. Is there anything else, Kathy?
Well,
Is that Kathy
Kathy Henderson came back on, but we're at the end of your 10 minutes anyway, but sorry you dropped off. Thanks for participating.
Yeah, okay. Oh, great. I see Kat. Yes, great. I see you're back. Well, I think I was just wrapping up, Ms. Henderson, so I think we're going to call it a night, but I appreciate you taking the time to join us and all the other candidates as well. So,
well, thank you. The outlet I was plugged in, it didn't work, so I had to move and switch to another one, but I appreciate the opportunity.
I gotcha. No problem. Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Great.
And may I ask everyone to go to my website, Kathy Henderson for DCCouncil.com.
Great. Thank you. And you can put that in the chat box too. So wonderful. Thank you for coming. And with that, folks, I think we're going to wrap up our meeting this month and look for some updates from me, probably in an email in a few weeks. And with that, unless there's anything else, the last announcement I want to make is the ANC 5B meeting coming up next Wednesday. I saw Ra Amin joined. I don't know, Ra, if you're on or can unmute yourself. 6:30 p.m. ANC 5B. It will be online, and at the September meeting, I understand that there will be guests from the Department of Behavioral Health who will be talking about some of the resources and services that DBH offers. I know we've had some conversations about that on the listserv lately, and so I think that would be a great opportunity for those who are interested in what DBH does to please check out our ANC meeting next Wednesday. The ANC5B.com, I believe, is their website, and unfortunately, I don't know the link.
That's right, Dan. It's going to be it's ANC. We're going to get that information up so people should be able to go to the website or either dial in or click on the link. And so we should have that up. And we have Department of Behavioral Health and Department of Human Services, along with the Public Service Commission, to talk about our utility services and everything that's going on with that right now. And I'm sure that a lot of people in the community are interested in the MPD's report with the uptick in violent crime that we've been experiencing of late. So hopefully MPD will be able to update us on all of that, because I know that Dan and I both have both have received requests to have some type of town hall about the violence that the community is experiencing right now. So we're going to start with an MPD report, and then we're going to see what we should do from there as a community, whether we should request MPD and council members' office to come into the community so we can have more one-on-one and more time with them.
Awesome. Thank you, Ra. Ra, is the it's ANC5B.com?
Yes, .com, yeah.
And that's where people can find the link for how to join that meeting. And again, it's next Wednesday at 6:30.
Next Wednesday at 6:30 on WebEx, and we will have that information out. If you have trouble accessing that information, feel free to reach out to me.
All right.
Dan, this is Renee. Just one quick correction. The address for Brooklyn Union is 3101 14th Street Northeast.
Yep. I got it right. 3101 14th Street.
3101. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thanks for the correction. Appreciate it. All right, folks. With that, we're going to call it a night.
Thank you.
See you next month.
Thanks, Dan. Great forum.
Bye. Thank you, Kathy.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kathy. Great job putting it together.